like a memory long grown dim, crying from creation's moment, seeking voice from deep within. I have heard you in my longing, I have heard you in my pain. Now I feel you moving in me, feel you burning like a flame. Now I see you all around me, now I hear you call my name. Now I speak the words you give me, now I feed creation's flame. You are speaking through my longing, you are speaking through my pain. Now I feel you moving in me, and I'll never be the same. Since you moved upon my waters, since you spoke and set me free, I have yearned for this communion, for your fire inside of me. Now your love defines my longing, now your love shines through my pain. Now we dance in endless union, singing out creation's name. Still I find within my living times of pain beyond my strength, and I cry to you for healing, yea, I cry to you at length. Though at times I wonder if you hear my cry amid my pain, I shall trust you till I die, calling on your blessed name. Life is a journey. How's that for a trite truism, or a true tritism? A saying is trite, my brothers and sisters, when over time, frequently repeated, it first becomes the proverbial wisdom of the ages, then later, common knowledge, and then even later, a listless cliche. That said, life as journey, proclaimed by prophets, contemplated by philosophers, taught by sages, rhapsodized by poets, is, I think, an eternal metaphor, laden with timeless meaning. Some say the most important thing about the journey is the beginning. Still others say the most important thing is the end. And still some others say the most important thing about the journey is taking it, embarking, taking a step, then another, then another. But whatever your view, my view, anyone's view, it seems to me that during the journey, on the occasion, it is important to stop and take a look around and ask the question, what do we see? Speaking always only for myself, having just passed my 63rd birthday, I confess to you that I do not like the idea of getting older. Frankly, being older. I do not like the notion of dealing with the limitations that attend this inexorable reality. Limitations that, like the proverbial trees, capture my focus and obscure my vision so that I can't see the forest, the full sweep of my life. And so it is that these days, when I look back, I find myself reflecting on opportunities missed and never to be regained. Historical moments indelibly printed upon the paths of my memory that I vainly wished, if only I could do that over. And then, after I stop looking around and I look at me, at times I focus on my increasing aches and pains and gaps in memory. And thinking about my parents aging, I sometimes wonder what and when will be my next loss in physical ability and mental acuity. Now, I don't intend to be morbid, but honest. And as I contemplate these things, looking around me, I also have to confess to you, my sisters and brothers, that I envy young people who possess what I perceive to be the unlimited possibilities of still elastic and expanding muscles and minds, still largely evolving worldviews, through which to perceive the still distant and far horizons of the hard, heartbreaking edges of existence where faith is tested. I envy you. Like Job, who journeying through the losses of children and possessions, health and hope, although when you get to the end of the story, all that is restored, but I can't possibly imagine that that erased his anguish entirely. So he gets at the end of his journey, his suffering journey's end, having battered the heavens with the question, why? Only to hear God's tempestuous whirlwind reply, in effect saying, Job, who are you, O mortal, to ask me? And there's a hard truth about life's journey. Friends, sometimes there are answers. And sometimes, like Job, there aren't answers. And as we have been horribly reminded this past week with the murders of folk gathering to pray at Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston. There are moments in human history that whene'er a reason can be discerned, and whate'er the answer might be, there is nothing that can explain the inexplicable. And through it all, friends, answers, no answers, half answers, we always must deal with what is. Much of it, like Job, outside of our control. And whatever course we might imagine or wish our life's journey to take, we must walk the path on which we find ourselves, some, if not most, of the twists and turns beyond our command to design and beyond our control to determine. Excuse me, I have to stop. Am I making sense to anybody in here today? Okay, amen. All right. Now, conventional wisdom says that when circumstances overwhelm us, We can control our responses to the situation. It's the make lemonade out of lemons approach to life. I don't know about you, but for me, I have known grievous moments when I've been out of control. When my feelings take flight from one anxious arc to another, and my thoughts, disorderly, disarrayed, contrary, and conflicting, crash into one another. This past week was such a time. I have grieved. I continue to grieve for those who died. I sorrow for their families, their friends. I sorrow for all of us. And I wrestle with my hurt, my anger, my outrage. Yes, at Dylan Storm Roof for the heinous act he committed. But I also have outrage at those aspects of our American culture that just as surely planted the seed, watered it to produce the bitter fruit of a violent racism. I digressed at this point in the sermon at 9 because it occurred to me to say, and the reason I say that is this: I'm not making excuses for Ruth, but I do not believe that any human being ever gets anywhere for good or ill without the helpful or hurtful hands of multitudes. Ruth did not get there by himself. So I'm outraged at him, but I'm also outraged at those parts of our American culture that produce and proclaim that violence. And I also hope that Ruth and all those embittered souls like him might see one day, one moment in time, a glimmer of the light of love, which, when beheld, can dispel the darkness of hatred. So I'm telling you, friends, this past week, my thoughts and my feelings have been all over the place. And still, on these occasions like this, I, like Job, I want to beg, God, do something. And again, conventional wisdom tells me in the form of basic Christian theology 101 that God doesn't necessarily remove our crises, but strengthens us to endure them. And that prayer doesn't necessarily change things, but it does change the one who prays. It deepens the faith, hope, and love of the one who prays. It deepens the wisdom and understanding of the ways and works of God in the world of the one who prays. Yes, I believe that. But still, when the storms of life threaten to swamp my boat, I'm like the disciples, and I become a biblical literalist. I want Jesus to wake up and do something. Say to the storm, peace, be still. It also occurred to me at 9 o'clock, and so I'll share it with you. Do you notice in the text, there are exclamation points? Jesus wasn't awakened, probably rudely, by the disciples, and he didn't say to the storm, peace, please be still. He said, peace, be still. I want Jesus to deal with the blustery winds and the billowing waves of the storm without and my fear within. You with me so far? All right. And still, having said that, when I look at this gospel text, I do find an intriguing detail, which I consider sustaining bread for our life's journey. And that detail is this: that before Jesus acted to still the storm, he was in the stern of the boat, asleep, sound asleep. I don't know how you sleep through a storm, but it must be sound. And that, my friends, is the posture of rest and trust. Many years ago, I was on an airplane flight from Chicago to a conference in Atlanta. And I was accompanying the Right Reverend Quentin Ebenezer Primo Jr., the then suffragan bishop of the Diocese of Chicago. The weather was turbulent. The skies were cloudy and roiling, and the plane was bouncing all over God's heaven, and I was terrified. I digress. Years ago, when I was first ordained a priest, I remember flying from Chicago to St. Louis to visit my family, and my father, this is really a Father's Day story. My father was so proud I was a priest, you just can't imagine. But I didn't wear my collar. And so I'm getting off the plane, and he's ready to greet his son, the priest, who is wearing street clothes. And he says, "Paul, where are your clericals?" I said, "Dad, it doesn't do any good for anybody on the plane to see a priest who is scared to death." I was terrified on this flight to Atlanta. And seated next to the bishop, I look over at him, and his arms are folded, leaning against the window, his head is down, and he is fast asleep. At some point, he woke up, looked over at me, gazed for an instant into my terrified eyes, and he said, "Son, have faith." And then rolled over and went back to sleep. I marveled in the midst of my terror. How could he be so calm? So I asked him later, I said, "Bishop, how could you be so calm in the midst of the storm?" And he said, "Paul, I was created by God. One day, I'm going to die and go home to be with my Lord. I'm grateful for both of those things and for every moment in between." It was in, friends, his sacred gratitude to God that he could joyfully enter every moment. And I have never known anybody like Bishop Primo. Somebody who could look back into his past, but not gaze longingly at some lost moment, and could gaze into the future and not gaze aimlessly at some distant horizon he might or might not reach, but rather in gratitude to God, someone who could be so abidingly, abundantly present in the moment. I have never known another soul who literally, physically, incarnationally inhabited a moment like Bishop Primo. And that, friends, being present in this moment, and in the next one when we get there, but not before, being present in this moment, I believe, is an aspect of what it is to have faith. Faith that is food for the journey, whether it's sun shining or stormy, joyful or sorrowful, to be present in this moment. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Amen.